Hello and good afternoon everyone, and thank you for joining our Mimecast Targeted Attack Protection webinar today. So we're joined here by Matthew Gardner from Mimecast, who will be presenting the webinar with you, and then we also have Matt Compton here from Bytes, who'll be talking about the relationship with Bytes and Mimecast briefly before we hand over to Matthew.
Thanks, Amy. I'm Matt Compton. I work in the data center team at Bytes and am responsible for the Mimecast relationship within Bytes. Bytes and Mimecast have a longer-standing relationship over a number of years, and in the last 2 to 3 years, where obviously security market has been driven through customers, it's been more and more relevant. Then it has become the fastest growing vendor at Bytes, and that's because we absolutely see it, as do our customers, as the best of breed email platform, and especially around the security layer, which what we'll be talking about today. Earlier this year, we awarded Growth Partner of the Year, which we're very proud about. And behind me, I have a team of product and licensing specialists, as long as technical expertise to help with things like migrations and deployments and setups of Mimecast. I'm not going to go into too much details because we've got Matthew on the call, who's joining us from the States today. He's going to go into a bit more details on the TTP offering and why it is doing such a great job for so many customers at the moment with the increased amount of ransomware and targeted attacks. So with that, I'll be back on the end to help with the Q&A. Thanks.
Hello all, hopefully you can hear me by now. I'm just going to fire up the slides so you can see what I see. So this is Matthew Gardner. I want to thank Bytes for hosting this session, and thank you for attending. I want to talk specifically about targeted attacks and drill into them and how you can defend yourself better than maybe you are today. So regarding the agenda, I'm going to hit basically a brief introduction of your adversaries that might potentially be focused on your organization. I'm then going to drill into the different flavors of targeted attacks that we decided to focus on for this session: ransomware, spear-phishing, and impersonation, which are all highly relevant in today's security world. And then I'm going to focus a little bit more on ransomware, partly because it's really a hot topic in the market. Most organizations we talk to have been hit by ransomware, either opportunistically, they've been hit by sort of general purpose ransomware, or they've been specifically targeted with perhaps new and more potent ransomware. And then I'm going to end the session talking about some of the defensive strategies you can take to improve, reduce the risk and improve your security posture against these and similar types of targeted attacks. So now, who are the attackers and why are they attacking you? Oops. So basically, there's, starting off with the two probably least likely that might attack you on average. First is the hacktivists, represented by the Guy Fawkes mask. I don't know why that's become so popular, but maybe the first hacktivists were from the UK, and nation states. So the hacktivists, their motivation, and actually the nation states' motivations are somewhat murky. It depends. But in general, if you're being attacked not for monetary reasons, but for political reasons or retribution or some sort of vigilante motivation, it's best to think of being attacked by hacktivists, whereas nation states generally are going after strategic advantage, one nation to another, although some nation states do participate in commerce as part of their national strategy. So in some cases, nation states will hit commercial enterprises and feed data to their equivalent commercial enterprises for some some technical advantage. But in general, the average organization doesn't often get hit by hacktivists in nation states. Not that you have no risk, and it depends obviously your industry. So if you're in aerospace and defense, or banking, or you're a government agency yourself, obviously nation states are probably more likely. And if you're in some politically sensitive marketplace, then perhaps a hacktivist might be more logical to hit you. But in general, for the most average organizations, some of the other attacker types are a little bit more relevant. So not to be forgotten is the insider. And I've specifically called out basically the 3 flavors of insiders that you need to keep in mind. First of all, there's the malicious insider. These are the people, employees, or contractors that you have really on staff that know they're doing harm to you, know they're taking something of value and deciding to do it anyway. Fortunately, those are relatively rare, but when they happen, it's extremely bad, because often, by definition, they're insiders, and if they're IT insiders, they often have much more privileges than your average end user and can thus do more damage and know how to cover their tracks. But fortunately, in most organizations, most people aren't malicious. They're really one of the other 2 types of insiders: accidental insiders, which is really largely what we're going to talk about here. These are insiders that have been co-opted by outsiders, either through spear phishing or some sort of trust-building process where they don't know that they're helping the bad guy win. They're just accidental, and they're not even aware that they're participating in the wrong thing. And then there's the 3rd type, which is policy violating insiders. These are people that are probably know they're doing the wrong thing. They're not trying to be malicious about it, but they're breaking policy, like sending sensitive data to their home computer for working at night or something. They're not trying to be malicious, but they're goofing up and obviously create some vulnerabilities that can concern you. So those are the insiders. But the rest of this session is going to be spent on cybercriminals. And really, cybercriminals are by far, for the average company, by far the most likely adversary, because everybody has money, and cybercriminals are interested in money and money only. And so, they can be spread around the world, they can be in your country, they can be in another country, because of course the beauty of the internet is that there's ubiquitous interconnectivity, and if they can operate using some of the techniques I'm going to talk about in a minute, the risk to them is fairly low, the payoff is fairly high, and it's a way where people that would not necessarily be criminals in the old world, in the physical world, find it advantageous to be criminals in the cyber world. So really, what they're after is money, and money is all they're after in most cases. And ideally, they're interested in anonymous money, like Bitcoin, where in the days before anonymous online currency, it was still relatively hard to get paid if you were a cyber criminal, because if you used the credit card system, obviously fraud reports would occur and your processor would get kicked off the network. So in general, legitimate participants in the credit card network don't want to get kicked off the network, so they don't do business with fraudsters, or they don't do it for very long once they recognize who they are. So the rise of anonymous currency has been critical and really has helped feed the beast. So some of the techniques they use, I'm going to go into these in somewhat more depth. Ransomware, spear phishing, and impersonation specifically is what we decided to focus on. And I'm going to start with spear phishing. And the reason I do that is it's really a building block. Spear phishing is not an end in itself. It's a tool delivered, via email and using forms of social engineering to basically build trust with the receiver. It's a basic building block because it's used often in ransomware campaigns. It's obviously used for impersonation because that's really they're impersonating someone via email. It's used to deliver other forms of malware. It's used to collect information for other attacks against other people. So the combination of social engineering and email is really, really very powerful, and that's why it's used. So really what it is the social engineering aspect is learning something about your target and the people who work at your target such that they can make their outreaches much more credible. So I'll give you some examples as we go, but if you're trying to get someone to wire you money, for example, via an impersonation attack, so you're probably going to have to find the person who has the privileges of wiring money. So it's probably somebody in the finance department, and a finance analyst of some type, or accounts payable person, or something like that. You need to learn who the CFO is. You need to learn who their bank is. You need to learn who some of their vendors are. Those sorts of things, so that you can craft perhaps an invoice, that you want to, a quote in quotes invoice that you want to get paid. Or if you're trying to get remote access to an organization, you might do something like that's in this email, try to get them to double click on an attachment or click on a bad link. You put something in there like hiring plan, or something about their personal finance, or something about the company's finance, or something that's really, really time sensitive, such that the person's trust goes up and their the suspicion goes down. So social engineering acts as a key contribution to all sorts of attacks. And one of the problems is, and the reason it's so attractive, is that if you look at statistics of attacks, successful attacks, and you work backwards, what you find out is, and when you test phish people, which a lot of organizations do, you find the time to send to the time to click is very short. And too many defensive schemes rely on the end user to do the right thing. But if you think about the average end user who does their job, often, at least with professionals, they do their jobs out of their email inbox, which may be flooded by lots of legitimate requests and email from all different places. How much time are they really going to think before they click? And that's really what's been a key challenge with social engineering-led spear-phishing attacks, is that their trust is higher because of the social engineering aspect of the attack, and their time is limited because they're busy people. And so because too many defenses rely on the user to do the right thing all the time, organizations remain quite vulnerable. And of course, attackers know this. And so if you look at statistics, like in this case from the most recent Verizon data breach report, and how attacks of different type were delivered, email, whether it's an attachment, an actual file attachment, or a link that brings the victim to a bad place on the internet to perhaps download malware or do something else, email by far is the #1 source. Not the only source, not the only delivery mechanism, but primarily, the main delivery mechanism. And the reasons are quite simple. I've touched on some of them already. It's obviously very cost-effective from the attacker's point of view. Sending an email costs nothing. The social engineering obviously might cost them some time, but as you'll see in a little bit, there are lots of tools online to make it less costly. It's extremely cheap. It's extremely easy to find, who to email and to deliver email, from an attacker to a potential victim. And it's also, as I mentioned, very trusted, and people work out of their email inbox. It's probably one of the most critical applications that people use on a daily basis. If email goes down, you hear about it pretty fast, and so that shows you how critical it is. So the combination of all that makes it extremely attractive to attackers, and they take advantage of it. So talking about the social engineering aspect of it, the reason it's so easy is that the world makes it easy. Pretty much every company in the world of any significance has a web page that looks kind of like this, where you can find out who the executives are in the company, their bio, perhaps even their email address right here. And so you can then draw a linkage between perhaps the CFO and the accounts payable, because presumably, the accounts payable person works for the CFO, at least, 1 or 2 layers down. So it's probably going to pay attention to an email from their boss or their boss's boss. I have mentioned tools. I'm not going to talk about all the tools. There's an incredible number of them out there, but this is just one that's really out there. It's so easy to use. I use Mimecast because I don't want to call out any other company. But you just go to this email hunter service, you put in a domain that you're interested in, and it's essentially a search engine for email addresses. And so it will give you all the email addresses that it's found on the internet, and it will give you a guess as to the structure of the company's email. So first initial, last name at domain.com. So now if you're an attacker and you find out, of course, the name of someone you're interested in, it's pretty likely it's first initial, last name at domain.com that will let you reach them. Other things help a lot too, depending on the type of attack. So public filings, by definition, are public, and if if you're trying to build trust with the finance department, either pretending that you're from the CPA or referring to the CPA builds credibility that you are who you're claiming to be. So in this case, the filing is from Adams & Adams, who has to sign off on their financial statements. So it's very simple for an attacker to find out all about that. So now let me switch gears and talk a little bit about impersonation. So impersonation is an primarily email-based attack these days that is known by many names. So if you see business email compromise or BEX or whaling or bank wire fraud or W-2 fraud, it's basically referring to the same thing. And it's really an attack technique that has stormed onto the scene. Obviously, from a technology point of view, there's not much to it in that there is no malware. There are no links, to a bad place necessarily. It's just a nice request, a nicely socially engineered request for something of value, money, wire transfer, data, W-2s, database dumps, or whatever the attacker's interested in. They send via a nice email, perhaps spoofing a domain sender, perhaps spoofing a trusted person like your boss's boss or somebody from the outside world that they know you do business with. But at the end of the day, they're trying to get you to do something or provide information that's of value to them. So this is one that Mimecast got some time ago, actually from our CFO to our accounting department, or basically another person in our finance department, which combined domain spoofing, which I don't know if you can quite see, but that is not mimecast.com. That is mimecast.com. But it also has social engineering, obviously, because it knows who the right people are. It uses, a nice psychological crutch not to ask for $50,000. It asks for $48,254.80, which is a more plausible, invoice. And it's delivered via email. So, if someone in your organization received something like this relevant for your company, would they initiate the wire transfer? In our case, we didn't for various technical and operational reasons. We were able to catch this before it became a problem. But this just gives you a sense that this is the type of attack. It's very targeted, of course, because they registered the mimecast.com domain some hours before sending this email, which is actually a clue that is used by a technology such as ours, that the email may be suspect. But those are the types of things that an attacker is willing to do to to essentially get your money in this case. Interestingly enough, the whole business email compromise or impersonation doesn't probably get the press it should. I mean, it gets press, and you see it in many different forms, like people getting email from their, in quote, mortgage provider to, when they're getting ready to close on a house, for example, and it's not really the mortgage provider, it's someone who's spoofing their mortgage provider or their solicitor, whoever's involved in closing the deal, to try to get the down payment, paid, those sorts of things. But if you look at this just from a pure dollars and cents, at least from the FBI's point of view, the business email compromise or impersonation is about 3 times the size of the ransomware market, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But most people are talking about ransomware. Probably has something to do with the sex appeal of ransomware, and you'll see the fact that ransomware is this flavor of malware, so it draws the attention of AV vendors and many vendors in the industry trying to stop malware, because that's sort of where the security industry cuts its teeth. But it's just kind of ironic to think that just emails requesting money that have no malware, no bad links, are in fact apparently 3 times more successful than ransomware is, at least currently. So now, ransomware. I think probably one of the reasons ransomware is interesting and catches people's attention is that it gets into sort of the personality or the psychology of the attacker. So there's some attacker, in this case for the Jigsaw ransomware, had to go to the trouble of getting an image of the Jigsaw character from the Saw movies, and it really gets your attention. If this popped up on your screen, it would be hard not to notice. But at the end of the day, what ransomware is pretty simple. It is a flavor of malware that has the goal to either lock up your data or lock up your computer to the extent that you can't use it, but you can still get some sort of ransomware note, and basically ransom you your data or your system back to you. And often, these days, it's most often done with fairly sophisticated encryption software, so that it will encrypt your files into a format that you cannot decrypt because the encryption is quite strong, and of course the key, literally the software key, is held by the ransomware attacker, and that you have to get the key, you have to pay. So as I mentioned earlier, it's still a pretty big business, purely from the attacker's point of view. This is the billion-dollar business is not the cost to the victim. This is an estimate from the FBI about what the amount of payments that will be made in 2016. The FBI data is not exclusively U.S., but it's primarily U.S., of course, given that it's a U.S.-based police force. So you could imagine, it's not hard to imagine that perhaps the global ransomware payments might be double this, given in many markets the U.S. is about half the size of the rest of the world. So nonetheless, it's not as big as business email compromise, but it's still quite big and quite profitable. And you've seen, if you look at ransomware over the years, you've seen a shift. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the shift before moving on to some of the other topics of essentially why ransomware has gotten so big in recent history. So it's moved. Ransomware has moved from a consumer impact to a business impact. Five years ago, ransomware did exist, and it was quite opportunistic. It was sort of thrown to the wind. It landed where it landed, and most entities on the internet, or many entities on the internet, are, just people at home, and so it would lock up your machine, and you'd be asked for $100 or something like that. But of course, if you think about it from the attacker's point of view, would you rather lock up Granny on the left, who probably doesn't even know what a Bitcoin is, and you're going to have to handhold her to get paid, assuming that she's even able to understand what she's in for, or would you hit an organization where you can lock up critical business systems, operational systems, or what have you? So clearly, from the attacker's point of view, the bang for their investment is much more shifted to businesses. It's also kind of relatedly shifted from the client to the server. In general, the attackers would rather have one server than probably 10 clients, because at the end of the day, unless they hit the right client, machine, the right endpoint, used by an end user, the probability is the company will just blow it away and reimage it, and they hopefully have a decent backup, and it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. But if you hit the server side, if you hit the file server, you hit a transactional server, now the company's business or an important aspect of the business is brought to its knees, and now that you've hit a business, the ability to pay is higher, and if you hit the server, the willingness to pay becomes higher. Also, in general, the ransomware has become more targeted, so the attackers will have enough intelligence for where their ransomware has landed, or about how successful they've become in a given organization, that they'll know things like which hosts were infected, how many hosts were infected, where are these hosts, and all of those, as you might imagine from the attacker's point of view, can sort of give them a sense of as the value. More hosts, the more value. If you're in the United States, the UK, the value is probably higher than if you're in some developing country. The willingness and ability to pay, probably in that case, goes up because they have locked down more of your stuff, and if you're in the developing world, you probably have more money that you can throw at this problem. So those are the types of things that are showing off, becoming more targeted. And just yesterday, in fact, there was over the weekend, really, there was a ransomware attack, which I think is also a shift that you're going to be seeing more and more of, is moving to critical infrastructure. So if you lock up someone's file server, depending on what kind of company it is, it's obviously bad, and so they're in pain. But maybe they have a good backup of their file servers and they can rebuild it in a day or so. But if you lock up an operational system, particularly a transactional system, like what happened in the San Francisco transportation system, they can't collect money. And by some estimates, there was nearly $600,000 a day the authority was losing because of their inability to collect money. And so while the actual transport mechanisms weren't impacted by this, meaning that the trains and buses still operated because they're separate than from the ticketing system, they had to throw open their doors basically because they couldn't, they had no other way to collect money, so they had to, people had to get to work, so they opened their doors and essentially lost, some estimates $600,000 a day. So their willingness to pay and ability to pay, can be measured. In this case, they didn't pay for other reasons, in that they had, after a few days, they were able to recover. But it just shows you that the attackers are shifting to where the money is. So just as a quick aside, a lot of the information that I'm going to talk about, upcoming now, comes from the Mimecast security system. So we see, depending on exactly how you count and what day it is, something on the order of 600 million emails a day for our 22,000 organizational customers. And that's become a pretty good sample because it's also global. We're a global enterprise, so we have customers around the world. So we get a pretty good sampling of the business emails that are going every day. And so we get a very good sample of the types of attacks, whether opportunistic and broadly thrown attacks or very targeted attacks. And obviously we use that data to make our system smarter and smarter. There's definitely a network effect where the more emails you see on a regular basis, the more customers you protect, the more global footprint you have, the more likely you are to see, get an early warning of an attack and then be able to feed that back into the protective system. So we're definitely up on that curve. Just as an interesting stat, in a very recent period, of all the malware blocked by the Mimecast system, nearly half of it was Locky, a specific flavor of ransomware. And there are many flavors of ransomware, but over the recent period, Locky has become the dominant ransomware system used by attackers. It's widely available. It's quite effective. It's relatively easy to deliver. It does the job well. So that's probably why it's become popular. Not that there aren't dozens of other flavors of ransomware that hit, but just to give you a sense of how big ransomware has become, at least as measured by our email system. So now, why is it getting so big now? Why is ransomware getting so big now? And really, it just has to do with, it's about the money. It's easy to execute and it's profitable. So you get more investment, you get more campaigns by more attackers. They're shifting their focus to where the returns are greatest, which is like what any business would do, except this is, of course, a dark business. So I talked about this, to deliver ransomware, you have to get it in, and often you get it in via email, and you got to get it in via some receiver or some victim or multiple victims, ideally, in an organization. The social engineering is so easy. Talked about that. Other things that are more technical that makes ransomware more popular, or gives the rationale for its popularity, is there's this whole industry of cybercrime software kits, and there are now a whole industry of cybercrime kits for ransomware. So what that means is that if I'm a ransomware entrepreneur, in quotes, I don't necessarily even have to code the ransomware. I can go to the marketplace and license, in this case, a TOX cybercrime kit to build and deploy my ransomware attack. Because if you think about it from the attacker's point of view, from their point of view, they're trying to hit as many good places as possible. It becomes a management challenge. They have to manage keys. They have to manage, the infection process. They have to manage the negotiation process. They have to manage, handing out the keys when they get paid. They have to manage the receipt of payment. They have to run their business essentially. And so instead of developing them themselves, they go to the marketplace and license software to do it for them. And so this is a sign that the marketplace is becoming mature because there's an ecosystem of providers, if you will, that are coming to market to enable this marketplace to work more efficiently, like any good developing market. I talked a little bit before, another critical linchpin of why ransomware is so popular now versus some years past is the rise of anonymous currency. I mean, if you didn't have anonymous currency, it would be super hard to get paid and to get paid consistently. Because legitimate systems like the credit card or PayPal, they actively will kick off bad providers or bad players as part of what they do for fraud reduction. But anonymous currency doesn't know who owns it, so it's like physical currency. A dollar bill doesn't know if it's being held by a good guy or a bad guy. It's just passed around as a means of exchange. Same for the cyber world now. Now back to the technical techniques. So if you think, well, why aren't preventive technologies that we've been using for years able to stop malware, or in this case ransomware in particular? It's because there are technical tools that are out on the market to help organizations avoid such tools. So this is an example of a service that's available online called FUD Crypting, fully undetectable crypting services. So what the customer does here is they send a file to this service, pay some money. In this ad anyway, it's 1.5 Bitcoins, and what they get back is a crypted version of that file, fully functional, that has been proven not to be detected by the AV engines that are out there. In fact, so they advertise you can send your remote access Trojan, your keylogger, other software to us, and if your files become detectable within 3 days, they'll recrypt it for you. So, these service providers are out there. Again, you don't have to be an expert in crypting. You just have to line up a service provider to do it for you. So, not surprisingly, industry observers are recognizing that past protection or defensive techniques have not worked or don't work as well as they used to. Sort of, this is stating the obvious, but incumbent antivirus prevention techniques cannot be relied on to detect and stop all ransomware. This is from a recent Gartner publication. So, presumably you're starting to think about what do you do to get around the fact. Doesn't mean you don't use traditional antivirus. It just means you're probably going to have to complement it with some other defensive techniques, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So finally, the delivery mechanisms for ransomware are really similar to the delivery mechanisms for malware in general. Email by far is the #1 delivery mechanism. It's just it works, and it's the right price, and it's ubiquitous, and all the things I've talked about. So they can either deliver the ransomware file directly via email. So if it's properly crypted, and you're just trying to use AV, it won't detect it, and it will do its job when it lands. Or sometimes they get more sophisticated, and they don't deliver the actual payload. They deliver a dropper, basically some sort of script that locally runs and reaches up to the internet and grabs the latest version of the ransomware executable that the attacker wants to use. Also via some sort of download via URL. So click the URL, and it takes maybe advantage of some vulnerability in a browser to cause a download behind the scenes. At the end of the day, getting the the ransomware executable down on that machine. There are other techniques that they're used with somewhat less regularity, but could certainly be used more if organizations lock down their email better. Drive-by download, so they attract you to some website, for some, using some maybe social engineering technique. And again, you get kind of like clicking on the bad URL, it brings you to a site. You get a background download. Botnets are somewhat used. Botnet masters can be part of a ransomware campaign, for a split of the money. They'll take some of their machines that they have part of their botnet army, and they'll give it over to a ransomware attack, and obviously for a split of the money. And then some ad networks can be infiltrated. So those ads that come into certain browser pages that you hit are served up by an ad network. The ad network could be spoofed into essentially delivering ransomware. Doesn't happen that much. Email by far is the #1 delivery mechanism, but there are other techniques that have been proven to work. So now I'm going to end the session on some of the defensive techniques you can take, and then we'll get back to any questions that have come up since I've started. So this is a picture of your end users, and this is actually somewhat of an idealistic picture of your end users. These are meerkats. And we find them a very interesting analogy for an ideal user community. If you've ever seen videos of meerkats, they're basically villages of families, and they tend to be grouped, in a certain area of the land. And if a predator comes into the meerkat city, the alarm system goes off pretty fast, and protective measures are taken. And so it's not that any meerkat can stop, a lion or whatever that's walking in, but they can alert their compatriots pretty fast. And that's really the model that we think people should use to think about from their user community. You're never going to have 100% defensive success with using your users, but if you had a very fast, messaging system, or where they respond quickly and realize maybe something bad's happening and they report it, and you're able to isolate the attack quickly, that's goodness. However, like I said, any system that's 100% reliant on users doing the right thing will be disappointed. And so really, from the point of view of this session, I wanted to focus on some technologies that you can use to automate your defenses. So clearly, a lot of these attacks, spear phishing and impersonation in particular, are email attacks. So you need to have an intelligent email system inspecting your inbound emails and looking for bad files, bad attachments, bad URLs, suspicious impersonations, spoofing domains, keywords that are potentially suspicious that are coming into your organization, so that you can either block them or at least flag them to alert the end user that something bad may be happening. So clearly, given the email is very popular, it's a basic building block now of a security program to have an email security system in place. Not the only thing you need to do, just some further ideas. If you think about protecting your network, if you can segment your network, it helps. So if, for example, if you get hit by ransomware and the ransomware is built to laterally move within your enterprise, it can only laterally move within the segment that node can talk to. So if you segment your network, you reduce the attack surface that the attacker can get to once they've gotten in. You can also use intelligent web gateways to inspect your inbound and outbound traffic. Other than email, your IP traffic that's not your email, to obviously look for attachments or downloads, or look for command and control communication that's going out to try to either prevent something bad from happening or at least detect it quickly. And then two other areas that you can focus on. I've sort of shown the vulnerability of traditional AV, but there's a whole new flavor of endpoint detection systems that are not based on file signatures, but based on behavior. So a bad behavior, for example, of a file running on a machine might be encrypting everything. So that the system might be able to prevent that from happening, or if it can't prevent that, it could at least alert you to that something bad is happening, and again, you can react and isolate that machine. So this new category of endpoint threat detection technology has some some opportunity to improve things using that. Things, blocking and tackling like vulnerability scanning and patching. The less vulnerabilities you have, the less surface area you have, the less likely you are to get popped by any kind of attack, including ransomware. Whitelisting, something that's definitely underutilized. Why does a transaction system in a transportation system allow any software to install itself that's not previously known to be whitelisted? So perhaps had they used whitelisting, the ransomware may have landed on the machine but wouldn't be allowed to execute because it wasn't on some pre-existing whitelist. These are systems that presumably are not being updated on an hourly basis. They on some quarterly or multiple times a year they may update it, and so they can lock the system down with whitelisting, for example, as a reasonable strategy. And then the final comment before I go to your questions is about backup recovery and continuity. So there are a lot of really basic IT principles that help with ransomware and help with other forms of infection. So if you have a good backup and you have a good recovery process, the fact that the certain machine is hit by ransomware is an annoyance, not a catastrophe, because you just recover the system. If you're dependent on a certain application or applications to do your work, email, databases, other things, file servers, if you have a failover, high availability, a continuity plan in place, again, the infection that hits you is something you just immediately work around, you fix the system, and then you go back to your previously good state, and perhaps your users don't even know that something bad had happened. So it's always good to have, whether it's email or other systems, a backup recovery and continuity plan in place, so that you can keep your business up and running as you're being infected by these sophisticated targeted attacks. So let me stop there and hand it back to the moderator, and we'll take your questions.
Thanks, Matthew. Very good. Really enjoyed that. Some really interesting points of how advanced these hackers are these days. So as we mentioned at the start of the webinar, there is a small area on the right-hand side that says questions. If you just click on that and then type in your questions, they'll come through to myself, and we'll run through them while we've got Michael and myself on the call. Okay, so we've got a question here that says, do you have any examples of how a TTP offering gives additional security on top of your standard email security provider? Hi, did you get that, Michael?
Sorry about that. I had muted myself. Matthew, by the way. So basically what Mimecast is basically a service that in the cloud that provides inspection of your inbound and outbound emails. And this question is probably more about the inbound, where attachments, attackers are sending attachments, or you're being spammed with attachments, or you're being attacked with an impersonation attack. And it's all about inspecting the email and taking it through a process before delivering it. So there's quick checks that can happen. Obviously, if someone's on a blacklist, they get rejected immediately. But if the attachment is a known piece of malware, it can get rejected immediately. And as you move down the funnel, if you will, more and more sophisticated inspections can happen, to the point where for impersonation protect, part of our solution, you can look at the domain registration. The system looks at the domain registration time and looks at keywords within the email, and basically does an assessment of the risk of the email, and either blocks it because the risk is too high, or flags the email with some flag text saying, hey, Mr. User, watch out for this, that they're asking for something that looks kind of sensitive. And so basically, people often think of an email security system of being traditional AV and anti-spam, and that's where the world began. But with solutions like the Mimecast TTP, it's gone much more deeper and into the guts of the email to inspect it, and obviously block things that look too risky, or at least flag things that look suspicious.
Thank you. So we've got one more question here. And it's come through and it says, good afternoon, so do you have any solution for ransomware?
Yeah, so there's no the solution for ransomware, in the sense that there's no 100% system that can stop ransomware, because it can be delivered many ways. However, as I went through in my session, the vast majority of malware, including ransomware, is delivered via email. So a first logical place to prevent it is before it arrives in your enterprise via email. So if it's a known piece of malware, a known piece of ransomware, the AV engines in a system like Mimecast will catch it. If it's a new flavor of ransomware, the sandbox capability of Mimecast will catch it. So essentially all of your attachments can be sent through a sandbox where the file is executed, it gets a score. If it's bad, if it's doing bad things like encrypting your files, it will get blocked. And so locking down your email is an important step. However, as I also mentioned, there's other ways to deliver ransomware. So, secure web gateways and network segmentation and whitelisting are other ways to help block, particularly the targeted attacks that will get by, traditional defenses. So, ransomware really brings forward the idea that, the attackers are sophisticated. They'll work around any one single defense. You need to have multiple layers, and you need to have a prevent, and you need to have a continuity plan for when systems do get hit, and you need to have backup and recovery for when systems get hit. And if all those things operate well, ransomware becomes more of an annoyance than a critical impact to your systems.
Okay, thanks. So we've got one more here. It says, hi, we've received several impersonation emails masquerading as if they were the CEO or CFO. They come with an invoice attached, usually with the details and bank account of a construction company to which the attacker requests immediate payment. Can the perpetrator be detected through these bank account details?
It's not so much through the bank account details. What an impersonation system like ours will do is we'll look at the domain, for example. So if it's like the example I gave him in the session, if it's similar to your domain but different, that's a flag that it may be an impersonation attempt. Another way to do it is, if the sender is claiming to be someone from your enterprise, a connection to your directory, your Active Directory, can suss out whether it's, an actual real sender, or actual real person in your enterprise. If the email is coming from the outside, for example, the internet, but it's claiming to be an internal email, that's a flag. If it's asking for keywords, and these are keywords we deliver, or you could add yourself, wire transfer is a key word. So if you take those things in combination, essentially emails that are attempting to impersonate something can get scored and, on a badness scale, and get flagged, get blocked if it's, if the score is bad enough, or at least get flagged so that the receiver, understands that they may want to take a double look. And then there's also things you should do, like, have some out-of-band. When money, like big money, is being talked about, there should be an out-of-band process to verify that everything's legit. And so, what out-of-band means depends on the situation, but, why not contact the known last good contact at that company and make sure that, this invoice is legit, and or, like organizations will do is they'll compare it to a outstanding purchase order to make sure that there's an actual purchase order in existence for whatever this invoice is claiming to be. And so all those sort of out-of-band checks can also increase the chances that you won't get popped by an impersonation. So it's a combination of technology, education of your users so they're aware that these attacks are happening in the real world, and sort of out-of-band controls that will, that you can use as compensating controls for your technical and human based controls.
Okay, brilliant. So that concludes today's webinar. If anyone has any further questions or would like us to go into a bit more detail one-to-one, then please submit questions to tellmemore@bytes.co.uk, and one of the team will certainly come back to you. Amy mentioned the critique forms at the start, so if you have got the time to fill one of those in, it's much appreciated. It just allows us to tweak these activities to make sure they're as beneficial to yourselves that are taking the time to join us for what's been nearly an hour of your day. So we want to make it as valuable to yourselves for joining. So thank you again, Matthew. Thank you again for helping us out, and
thanks for having me.
No worries. Cheers.